Hello and welcome to my channel on Ancient and Chinese Astrology. In my first video I would like to review in brief the history of Ancient Astrology. First I would like to recommend to you the article that I wrote on my website 100%astrology.com. The article's name is "What is Ancient Astrology?" This is the contents of the article. It's a detailed article, and I explain what I mean by by ancient astrology and how it differs from other forms of astrology, such as Hellenistic or even perso-arabic, traditional, Renaissance, etc., etc. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Now the reason I'm making this video is because first of all, to shed light on in general on the history of astrology and why it's so important, because knowing the history of ancient astrology will also help you to get to know, it will help you to ask yourself some questions. Namely, why do you practice or study the type of astrology that you do? What are its philosophical foundations? Where this astrology came from? What was its original form? Etc., etc. Another reason I'm making this video is because there is a lot of information on the history of ancient astrology, but this information is fragmented. By that I mean there are astrologers who specialize in so-called Babylonian or Mesopotamian astrology. There are those that specialize in Hellenistic. There are those that specialize in perso-arabic or medieval. There are those that specialize in traditional, etc., etc. astrology. I'm leaving aside modern astrology for now. It is important to know the history, because by knowing it you will know how astrology came to be, how it was developed, and how it improved actually over time, etc., etc. And also, very importantly, what led to astrology being attacked and criticized and even banished and exiled and outlawed, etc., etc. So lots of heavy duty concepts in this video of mine. So let's get started. So first of all, I would like to specify that by ancient astrology I mean horoscopic astrology, that is natal astrology, that is astrology that has the 12 houses, 12 places, that has, in other words, the type of astrology that we've been practicing for centuries or even for two millennia. Because the original form of astrology was initially developed either in most likely in Mesopotamia or in Egypt, and it was a very basic, not almost primitive type of astrology. There was no natal astrology back then, and they worked with observation of the sky. So it's a very different type of astrology. I'm not going to dwell on this. I'm going to make a separate video about it, but just to let you know that, again, by astrology, by ancient astrology, I mean horoscopic astrology, a chart with 12 houses, with taking into account sect and the rulership of planets over the signs, and the joys of the planets, the dozens and dozens of the planetary configurations, etc., etc. Okay, so first of all, let me say that by Hellenistic astrology, or the Hellenistic period, the scientists understand the period between Alexander the Great, so 4th century BCE, before the Common Era, so around 340 BCE to 30 BCE, when Rome conquered Ptolemaic Egypt and Cleopatra died. So this 300-year period. Having said that, it is important to know that again, the type of astrology that I'm discussing, it appeared sometime about 1st century or early 2nd century before the Common Era, right? And also it's good to know that the first surviving horoscopes, the natal horoscopes, are from the early 5th century BCE. But these horoscopes, they come from the Mesopotamian tradition. They are extremely basic. They don't have the 12 houses, etc. I will explain why. This is very important to know, because there's those astrologers in Bulgaria, but not just in Bulgaria, that claim that astrology, existed full-blown thousands of years ago, etc., etc. Again, this is not true. Natal astrology, again, it's only about 2,000 years old. So again, let me assure you that what I say, I'm basing this on facts, on historical sources, on translations, etc. These are not conjectures. These are not, my views, or etc., etc. All right. So the three main sources that I used in preparation for this video are American astrologer Chris Brennan's book Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune. Very thick book, over 600 pages long. Also, The Fated Sky, Astrology and History by Benson Bobrick. This is the best book if you want to study the role of astrology, the influence of astrology in history. This is the best book. Benson Bobrick he's a professor or something. He's an academic. He teaches at an American university. And the third book is Astrology in Roman Law and Politics by Frederick Kramer. This book was written in 1954. He was a professor of history. I have to warn you that this book, the font is extremely small. It really hurts the eyes. I mean, if you want to get it, I recommend it, but extremely small font, and yeah, I will not read this book on artificial light. So anyhow, these are the three books, with Chris Brennan's book being again as a very thick. Brennan quotes many sources that translate directly from the ancient texts. Benson Bobrick uses over 400 references in his book. So again, these books are over 1,000 pages, even more. So what I'm saying here can be easily double checked and confirmed. So let's get to it. So the first thing you need to know is that again, ancient astrology, natal astrology is very different. It makes an entirely new beginning in the history of astrology. And for example, we have in Chris Brennan's book, he quotes there was a Roman edict, a Roman law that banished astrologers from Rome in the year, I believe, 139 BCE, so 2nd century before the Common Era. And there in this edict, the astrologers are called Chaldei, in other words Chaldeans, in other words Mesopotamians, Babylonians. So there is no mention of, again, this is in Rome, no mention of astrologers outside of the first tradition of mundane astrology. So again, as late as 2nd century BC. And after this, what happened was that the major breakthrough that occurred was that the Greek astronomer and mathematician Hypsico of Alexandria, who lived in the 2nd century before the Common Era, he wrote a book called On Ascensions. And as a result of writing this book, again, he is dated for sure to have lived in the 2nd century BCE, but some say, so he wrote the book around 140 or 135, 130 BCE. So this book allowed for the first time astrologers to calculate the ascendant, the rising sign, the rising degree, and the 12 houses. So before this book, even though Babylonians, Mesopotamians, Egyptians, they had, and also Indians, they had observations spanning tens of thousands of years, if not more. They had observational astronomy and astrology, nothing more. They could not calculate the houses. Again, we don't have any surviving horoscopes that show the houses prior to this period. Again, these are easily checked historical facts. So as a result of this breakthrough, again, I want to express my gratitude. He was not an astrologer, he was a scientist, he was a mathematician and astronomer, and yet he helped astrology tremendously. Hypsical, so in the 2nd century in Alexandria in Egypt, and following this, the publication of his book, also we have the founders of ancient astrology, of Hellenistic astrology. They're the holy three, I call them, even though there are more, but the three central ones are Hermes Trismegistus, Nicepso, and Petusiris. So these three are the foundational authors. Again, we don't know for sure when they lived. They are dated to 2nd century BCE, but we don't even know whether Hermes was human, whether he lived for sure, because Hermes is the Greek god, the messenger of the gods, and it's also god taught of the Egyptians, etc., etc. But what we do know is that, and this is also a very important point to keep in mind, is that this does not just pertain to astrology, to ancient astrology, but also to ancient philosophy and other sciences and arts, in that the primary sources did not survive. So as a result of this, for example, the Stoicism is a very influential philosophical movement of the ancient world, and some even Roman emperors were Stoics, so Stoicism, it did not survive. It had to be restored by quotations of and paraphrases of ancient authors. The original sources did not survive. This is a known fact, and also that Chris Brennan explains, and not only Chris Brennan, also what I'm saying is that even though, again, Hermes, Nicepso, Petusiris, etc., we don't have their surviving works. What we have are fragments, pieces, bits and pieces quoted in ancient authors, which I will mention. So in other words, we call it Hellenistic astrology or ancient astrology at first, but this type of astrology was was practiced and flourished in the Greco-Roman world from the 1st century of the Common Era to the 7th century, when Hellenistic astrology declined and was transmitted. So it could also be called Greco-Roman astrology, easily. Again, this is not Babylonian, this is not Egyptian, this is Greco-Roman astrology, the original form of natal astrology that was also transmitted to India, that I will also touch on. So the point is that we have to be very careful about making, we have to distinguish theories and assumptions and presumptions from facts, from known facts, and from surviving evidence. Okay, what I'm saying again, these are facts that can be easily checked. So what we have are bits and pieces of the original tradition. We don't know for sure how exactly this tradition looked like, because again, it did not survive. What we do know, however, is that we have, because of this lack of materials, we have two schools of thought, so to say. The school of thought of the original, of the sudden invention, sudden discovery of Hellenistic astrology, versus the school of thought of the gradual development. And so proponents of the sudden invention, sudden discovery are David Pingree, the American scientist, linguist, historian, etc. Also James Holden, the American astrologer, researcher, etc., translator, linguist, and also Robert Schmidt, the man who played the pivotal role in restoring Hellenistic astrology. Unfortunately, all three of them are dead. Okay, and then on the side of the gradual development theory, we have Robert Hant, famous American astrologer and lecturer and author. We also have Nicholas Campion, author and lecturer and I believe teacher of astrology at Kepler College in the United States. And we also have Dorian Greenbaum, which is an American astrologer. She knows ancient languages. She has translated books. She has written a book on temperament, very good book. And also Mika Ross. Mika Ross is, let me show you, he's an academic, probably an American in the United States. He has some articles on astrology, for example, the role of Egypt in the development of the horoscope, etc., etc. You can you can check him out. So what I'm saying is, it's very important to keep this in mind, because when we start examining how the initial concepts and primary concepts were introduced, we have to make our own mind about whether we fall into the camp of the sudden invention or the gradual development or somewhere in between. For example, Chris Brennan himself, he falls somewhere in between. Now, for myself, I was very influenced by Robert Schmidt, and initially I was into the sudden discovery and sudden development. However, a very important point needs to be made, namely that these people that I mentioned, be they scientists or astrologers or translators or historians, they're focusing only on Hellenistic astrology or Babylonian or etc. The earliest form, and nothing else. Whereas myself, as I said in the original video, I'm a professional astrologer, I'm a practitioner, I have clients, I make daily predictions, I'm a practitioner, I'm not a scientist or a theoretician. So I use all types of astrology, but I stay true to the original tradition, which is again what I call ancient astrology, the astrology of the ancients, because the ancient astrologers, when they spoke of others, of their predecessors, they always called them the ancients. Like Ptolemy, like Valens, like the Russian Bulgarian astrologer Fyodor Gruzinev from the 20th century, that he wrote a book, Astrology of the Ancients, Астрологията на древните, in Bulgarian. Again, he was decades before Project Hindsight or Giuseppe Bezza in Italy. He was practicing ancient astrology and Indian astrology also in the mid 20th century. So anyhow, let me show you something about the houses or the places that's an argument against the sudden discovery, because because of tremendous differences in the meanings of the houses. Now, first of all, let me say that originally we had, so let me say that the three primary authors, I will give you the names of other authors as well, but the three primary authors you should know is that Dorotheus of Sidon, 1st century CE, the three primary Hellenistic authors, Dorotheus of Sidon, Vitias Valens, 2nd century CE, and Claudius Ptolemy, 2nd century CE. These are the three foundational authors of the Hellenistic tradition. I will give you more names, but the point I'm making is that in Dorotheus, which is one of the earliest astrologers, 1st century, he in his 5 books that Benjamin Dykes has translated from Arabic paraphrase of a 9th century astrologer Umar al-Tabari. But the point is that originally they used it's apparent that it used only the 4 angles: the first, the 10th, the 7th, and the 4th, because in the examples of inceptional or electional astrology, and also later on in the perso-arabic tradition of horary astrology, we have many rules and cases whereby we judge the whole question, the whole chart, based on the 4 angles alone, nothing else. All right. So this is where also we can say that the riddle of the Sphinx in Greek mythology comes from about the 4 stages of life and about time, etc. But my point is that originally we had 4 angles. Later on, we have 2 types of two traditions. So no, not 2 traditions, but two schools, if you will. Hermes, the original founder, Hermes, he wrote a text on the 12 places, the 12 houses. We're talking cosine houses, of course. And also Asclepius, a student of his, or someone who was influenced by Hermes, wrote another text on the 8th house system, octotropos. Again, you might not know this, but this is very, very important. And in fact, I will read you the meanings of the houses according to Hermes and Asclepius. These are given in Chris Brennan's book. Of course, he also gives the original source. The original source is Thrasyllus, 1st century astrologer, who was a imperial astrologer to, I believe, to the Roman Emperor Tiberius, and he died in the year 36 CE, I believe, 1st century. So Thrasyllus is one of the earliest astrologers. In fact, as I said, Dorotheus, Thrasyllus, Baubilus, these are the earliest astrologers, Manilius of the 1st century, that have survived. So in his work, The Tablet, in his summary, Thrasyllus summarizes the meanings of the 12 houses according to Hermes Trismegistus. Again, so the 1st house is the helm, fortune, soul, way of life, siblings. The 2nd house is hopes, expectations. The 3rd house is action, the same word praxis used for profession, and siblings. The 4th house is foundation of happiness, paternal possessions, slaves. And it's I found it very interesting because in the Indian tradition, in Jyotish, Indian astrology, they use the 4th house for the mother and also for happiness. Very it seemed very strange, but there you have it, where they took it from the Hermes text. The fifth house, Hermes says, is good fortune. The 6th house is punishment, injury, and also demonic fortune, which some authors translate as demonic possession. The 7th house is death and the wife. Notice death to the 7th house, not to the 8th. The 8th house is life, which the Indians took as longevity, and livelihood. The 9th house is travel, living abroad. The 10th house is fortune, livelihood, life, children, procreation, action, occupation, again praxis, esteem, authority, and ruling. The 11th house is good spirit. The 12th house is bad spirit, pre-ascension, livelihood, again this word, the same word, bios, and submission of slaves. So as you see, this is the supposed founder of ancient astrology, of Hellenistic astrology. Look at the names of the houses. Very, very different from what we are using. Very incomplete. Now, pay attention to the meanings of the 8 houses of the octotropos in Thrasyllus. Again, he's quoting Asclepius. The 1st house is life. The 2nd house is livelihood. The 3rd house is siblings. The 4th house is parents, both parents. The 5th house is children. The 6th house is injury. The 7th house is the wife, spouse. The 8th house is fortune and death. Now, do you see what's happening? What's happening is that originally they had this, and then it merged into one system of the names of the 12 houses, of the 12 places. And as Robert Schmidt points out, and not only him, it's easily visible that in the Hermes significations of the houses, we have only the 7th house for the wife, and the 3rd house for the siblings, and the 1st house for the siblings. No other well, the 10th house is children, but it's not the primary house. But anyhow, the point is that the meanings of the family members, the significations of the family members, are found in the Thrasyllus, in the Asclepius text that Thrasyllus also summarizes. Again, the 3rd house is siblings that we use, 4th house is both parents that we use in ancient astrology, 5th is children, 6th is injury, it's also slaves, 7th or subordinate, 7th is the wife, the spouse, etc. So as you see, this argument is very strong against the sudden invention theory, because how can you have such very, very different meanings of the houses? I mean, we have the houses, the planets, the aspects and the rulerships. That's basically, of course, fixed stars, lots, etc. But these are the fundamentals. And also to what also happened, it also, as Chris Brennan explains, and also as Vettius Valens gives, when Vettius Valens, the 2nd century astrologer, the astrologer that quotes over 100 charts, the most prolific astrologer of ancient times, Valens mixes the meanings of the houses between the Hermes text and the Asclepius text. And as here are the meanings of the houses. As the first house is the helm, it rules the life, the body, the spirit, and inception. The second house is the gate of Hades, it rules livelihood and possessions. The third house is the goddess, it rules siblings, living abroad, relatives, and the queen. The fourth house is the subterranean place, it rules parents, home, death, and hidden or mystical matters, mysteries. The fifth house rules children and good doing, it's the good fortune house. The sixth house is the bad fortune house, it rules slaves, injuries, sickness, and enmities. By the way, these enmities, this is also the house of enemies originally, and this assignation to the sixth house, the Indians took it and they kept it as sixth house, whereas later on in the tradition, the perso-arabic tradition, it was moved to the seventh house as open enemies. So marriage, partnerships, and open enemies. Okay, moving on, the seventh house is the setting place. It rules marriage, the spouse, sex, and living abroad, or rather long terms abroad. The eighth house is inactive place. It rules death, inheritance, punishment. The ninth house is God. It rules travel, mystical matters, divination, astrology, the king. The 10th house is the midheaven. It rules reputation, occupation, advancement, children, change. The 11th house is the good spirit. It rules friends, hopes, and gifts. The 12th house is the bad spirit. It rules suffering, enmities, sickness, and dangers. So again, as you see, very, very important that we have this mixture between the ancient systems, and in other words, that astrology, I mean, this is what is clearly seen, is that astrology developed actually as time moved on, not the other way around. It did not devolve. So what else can I say? Well, it is important to know that around this time, first century of the Common Era, Christianity was created, and or rather I should say invented by well, there have been lots of books on the topic, but I don't want to digress. I recommend Akariah Sitchin's The Correct History, The Greatest Story Never Told. There is a Caesar's Messiah documentary, etc., etc. But the point is that the Roman Empire started to decline, started to wither, started to weaken internally, most importantly, first of all, through vices, through laziness, through gluttony, through greed, and then it started losing battles and started, it became increasingly difficult to hold on to the territories it had conquered, etc., etc. The point is that this also influenced astrology, of course, and also the library, the famous library in Alexandria, got burned, and many sources got lost. And also, as astrology became more and more widespread, it threatened those in power. They felt threatened at least by it, and so they started passing some laws, some edicts against astrology, and Chris Brennan gives specific years that these edicts were passed in the Roman Empire. Also, as Christianity got stronger, it started attacking astrology. Wait a second, someone would say, I thought that it was about loving your enemies, about being, tolerant, being, noble and charitable. Anyway, forget about it. Let me just say that I'm not attacking Christian people. I mean, Christianity is the official religion of Bulgaria. I'm from Bulgaria, but that's not the point. The point is that the psychopaths that root Christianity, the psychopaths that root Islam, etc. I'm talking about organized religion. I'm not talking about the common people that follow the tenets, the Ten Commandments, etc., etc. I'm talking about using religion to subjugate the masses, to control people, This is what I'm talking about. And because as you'll see, the same thing that happened to Hellenistic astrology happened to perso-arabic astrology later on. Namely, as Islam got stronger and stronger, certain circles, they started suppressing astrology to the point where astrology almost got banned later on. So the point is that we have these texts that are paraphrases of the original tradition, and yet we see that astrology started to develop and to flourish little by little. We see this again. This is not conjecture. These are facts based on surviving horoscopes. We can see how horoscopes were interpreted originally, and we can see how they were interpreted later on. What do I mean by this? Well, the longest surviving horoscopes of the Hellenistic tradition are three of them. Delineations from the Antigonus of the 2nd century of the Common Era. He quotes these three nativities, one of them being of Emperor Hadrian, the Roman emperor of the 2nd century. And he says that this is how those in the circle of Nikepso and Pedosiris read charts, interpreted horoscopes. And when you see how they interpret charts, you will see that it's very, very different from the way the Persian, the Arabs, and the European astrologers interpreted horoscopes. So this type of astrology, again, getting back to this argument of whether it's this sudden invasion or not, again, it depends on how you view it. But if you view astrology as a whole, as divine knowledge coming from the higher realms, it doesn't matter what culture it came from. So what I'm saying is, Hellenistic astrology, again, in my article, what is ancient astrology, that I show and explain in detail, Hellenistic astrology is incomplete, Perso-Arabic astrology is incomplete, European astrology is incomplete, etc. Traditional astrology is incomplete, but astrology reached its highest form of development in the Perso-Arabic period. And again, this is based on the charts that we have, and also the techniques and the manuals that have survived and been translated into modern languages. Let's see, what else can I mention? Well, this is interesting. Few people know that in fact nothing is new under the sun. The ancient trick of saying do as I say, not as I do, was just as true as then as it is now. What am I getting at is that the so-called Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor of the 4th century that legalized Christianity, he also used astrology, believe it or not. Even though he attacked astrology on the outside for the masses, he used astrology. And again, this is a known and easily observed fact. What I mean is, what you see here is the election of the capital of when the Roman Empire started to decline in the 4th century, in the year 330, he moved the capital. So he broke the empire into two, into Western and Eastern, and he moved to Constantinople, which is nowadays Istanbul, again, which is the border here, Turkey, which is on the border with Bulgaria. So this electional chart actually survives in the Vatican Library, and a Bulgarian astrologer, astronomer, translator, linguist, etc., scientist, Rumen Kolev, he published some translations and some books years ago. And in one of these translations, I'm holding the book right now in my hands. It's called The 3 Annual Charts for Ferdinand I by Luca Gauricos, a very famous Italian astrologer in the 16th century, 1532. And on page 79 to 81, there is these charts that Luca Gauricos says, again, it's in Latin, that Rumen translated in English. And I believe also in Bulgarian, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, I have the English translation. Luca Gauricos says that his brother Pomponius Gauricos found in the emperor in the Vatican Library, and he shows the chart, the election of Constantinople, and this is it here that you see. Very strong chart, but I don't want to digress. So again, astrology was used all the time as it is used now today. But the point is that as the Roman Empire started to decline, and as the Western Roman Empire was destroyed in the 5th century by various German tribes, etc., astrology started experiencing great problems, because there were not that many literate people, there were not that many educated people, and also the patronage that kings and emperors were giving, obviously they did not allocate the same amount of money, etc., which also happened in ancient Mesopotamian times, by the way. But the point is that astrology grew weaker and weaker, and Christianity got stronger and stronger. And one of the culminating events that happened was in the 6th century, where Emperor Justinian, I believe it was the year 529, he closed the gates, he banished and exiled both the astrologers and the philosophers from the Roman Empire, and they went to Persia, to the Sassanid Empire, Sassanian Empire, and which was founded, I believe, in the 3rd century. And when the Sassanian Empire was founded, they started sending emissaries to other, to Rome, to India, to other parts, to exchange knowledge. And again, we see that in history, whenever there has been free flow of information, of trade, of knowledge, of travel, of exchange of goods and services, human civilization has reached its peak. It has lived happiest, it has lived in peace, it has lived in prosperity. The same goes for astrology. And whenever there has been war, darkness has followed, destruction has followed, unhappiness and death has followed. So what else can we say? Well, it is interesting that in the 2nd century, around the mid-2nd century, because Chris Brennan explains in his book, because sailors learned to use the monsoon winds, they started making direct trips from Egypt to the western borders of India, and so a group of Greeks and Egyptians and Romans, they moved to live in India, and they took the ancient astrology, Hellenistic astrology, with them, and they wrote a book that they transliterated in Sanskrit called Yavana Jataka, which means astrology of the Greeks. And in this book, they in fact they brought major concepts that did not exist in Indian astrology, that were just transliterated in Sanskrit. And as Robert Schmidt, Chris Brennan and others have explained, we have again many concepts like void of course moon, kenodromia becoming kenodruma, we have apoklima for a declining cadent house being apoklima, epanaphora being panaphora, succeedent house. We have kentron as angle or stake becoming kendra in Sanskrit. Again, these words mean nothing in Sanskrit. They were just transliterated. And yet the Indians, they took them as if they invented them, which is obviously not the case. We have decan for decanate. It became drekana, etc. Many basic fundamental concepts were bastardized, so to say. This does not mean that the Indians did not have their natal tradition. Obviously, they did, but they were very influenced by the Hellenistic astrology, not the other way around. And again, this is easily observable fact. But anyhow, the Indian tradition is also very ancient. I have tremendous respect for Indian astrology. Anyhow, let's get back to the topic, namely, as this type of astrology, Hellenistic astrology, started to decline. It got transmitted to the Persians, as I said, to the Indians, this book, and also to the after the Arabs destroyed the Persian civilization, they inherited this knowledge, and also they started translating books from ancient Greek. But let me, in addition, so I said, remember, Dorotheus of Sidon, Benjamin Dykes translated the book from Arabic. Vitius Valens, Robert Schmidt translated it in English, Mark Riley translated it in English, the full edition for free. You can find it on the internet. The Anthology of Vitius Valens. Claudius Ptolemy, Robert Schmidt, his translation is the best. We have here a translation from French to Bulgarian. It's excellent also. I have cross-checked it. There are many translators of Ptolemy, but Schmidt is by far the best translation for English. Again, for Bulgarian, those that speak Bulgarian can use this, or French can use this this translation that I mean. Also, Firmicus Maternus, 4th century astrologer. He was a lawyer. He wrote the longest surviving book on Hellenistic astrology. He wrote it in Latin, not in Greek, ancient Greek. It was translated by James Holden, the full book, very long. We also have Hephaestio of Thebes, 3 books. Schmidt translated 2 books. Edward Gramaglia with Benjamin Dykes published the 3rd book. What else? We have well, the other astrologers, Hellenistic astrologers, are fragments for the most part. We have Anubio, we have Manetho. Manetho has a book, but it's not as useful. Manilius has a book, not useful at all. Anubio, let's see, Antiochus of Athens, very important author that Robert Schmidt translated from Definitions and Foundations. Also, the Introduction to the Tetrabiblos by Porphyry, 4th century astrologer. He is the only one that has preserved the doctrine of the captain of the Curios of the chart. Extremely important spiritual doctrine. We also have, let's see, who else? For the most part, these are, let's see, but for the most part, these are the Critodemos. He wrote, I mentioned Antigonus, the anonymous astrologer of the year 379. He wrote a text on the fixed stars. He quoted Hermes, supposedly. Yes, Paul of Alexandria, important small book. Rhetorius of Egypt is actually, he's the last Hellenistic astrologer around late 6th century of the Common Era. And yeah, Timaeus, it's again, they have bits and pieces, but the authors that I mentioned, they are the primary ones. Okay, moving on to the perso-arabic period. They have their tradition that they inherited from the Persians, but as I mentioned, this is where they created mundane astrology, a new type of astrology, based on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, 20 year and 240 year and 720 years, and also based on the conjunctions of Saturn and Mars, the malefics in Cancer, in their detriment and fall respectively, etc., etc. But the point is that the doctrine of reception, extremely important doctrine, it did not exist in Hellenistic astrology. The doctrine of derived houses, it was mentioned in Hellenistic astrology, but it was not used in the practical horoscopes, and other doctrines as well. Very important developments in the Perso-Arabic traditions, which again prove the point that ancient astrology developed and improved as time went on, not the other way around. Yes, some crucial methods did not survive, like visibility of the planets, so heliacal phases, etc., but other far more important doctrines were developed that more than compensated for this. Unfortunately, again, the doctrine of the curious, of the captain of the chart, did not survive, did not pass to the Arabic astrologers, but other doctrines passed. So Dorotheus was translated, Ptolemy was translated, Valens was partially translated, and other authors were also translated. And we have, as you see here, the chart of Constantine the Seventh, the Roman Emperor. This chart has survived from the 10th century, and we can see how astrologers interpreted the chart of the emperor. There is a pretty much complete delineation of his life. So this is also a good way to compare how this astrology differed, whether it differed from the astrology of Antigonus of Nicaea of the 2nd century, that quotes Nehepso and Petusiris and other astrologers influenced by them. And later on, so let me mention briefly the most influential perso-arabic astrologers. Before I do that, let me say that not just as I showed with Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire, of the Eastern Roman Empire, but also Baghdad, the capital of the Arabic Caliphate. This in the year, as you see, 762. Baghdad was created with astrology. Again, the chart survives, and Baghdad became the biggest city in the world. When London and Paris people were pissing and shitting on the streets, the Arabs were centuries ahead of the Europeans. Again, has nothing to do with biases. I'm a European. It is what it is. All right, let's face the facts and acknowledge them, and be grateful for this great culture that they inherited and that they preserved. Because so let's get back to the names. Abu Mashar is the most famous Arabic astrologer. He was a skeptic. He lived almost 100 years old, up to 100 years old. He was a skeptic for the first 50-40 years, and his teacher Okindi illuminated him and enlightened him. And then he became so famous and so influential that his materials were taught for centuries in European universities, where astrology was regarded as the highest science along with astronomy. Abu Mashar has been translated by Benjamin Dykes and others. Mashallah, Persian Jew. Again, nationality doesn't matter. These authors and astrologers, they served caliphs and viziers and etc. and kings, and they wrote in Arabic. So Mashallah, late 8th century, early 9th century, he elected the chart of Baghdad along with others. Umar al-Tabari, also Benjamin Dykes has translated all these. Mashallah, Umar al-Tabari, Abu Bakr, also early 9th century. Saw ibn Bishr, late 8th, early 9th century, also tremendous book on nativities, perhaps the best book. Whereas Abu Mashar's book is the best on predictive astrology, the cycle of the year, annual charts and not just annual charts, solar revolutions, etc. Sorry. And we have Al-Qabitius, 10th century. We have many other Perso-Arabic astrologers. We have Al-Biruni, the famous polymath and scientist, was also an astrologer, 10th, 11th century, etc., etc. But the point is, as I mentioned, as organized Islam became stronger, and again, Islam is ruled by Venus. Again, it has its great tenets as any religion. However, those that used Islam used it to subjugate people and others, and used it very viciously and aggressively. Likewise with Christianity, Judaism, etc., etc. The point is that as these circles, these people, these psychopaths got stronger, they started attacking astrology, even though the caliphs and others used astrologers all the time. Known facts. And astrology suffered and suffered. And let's see what else. Well, in the 12th, moving forward to the 12th century, when after the Second Crusade, European rulers started conquering back territories that the Arabs, the Muslims had conquered, such as Spain, etc. Little by little, they found tremendous amount of books and scrolls and materials on many subjects. Again, astrology is just only one part of life. I mean, I'm talking about science, many types of science, and many types of knowledge. And they started translating. They brought in translators and scientists, etc., specialists, and as a result, European astrology started to was not founded, but started to prosper and to flourish. And in a way, it was founded. It inherited this rich tradition. And as a result, European astrologers started as all astrologers of all ages have done. They worked with what they had and they improved it. They served emperors and kings and popes and aristocracy. They predicted on a daily basis, and they improved their practice. They became better and better, and astrology advanced, not the other way around. And again, we can see this from charts that have survived and how they interpreted them. For example, Roman Kolev, again, he translated this famous horoscope interpretation of the 15th century scientist Regiomontanus. His real name was Johannes Müller. He delineated the chart of the Roman emperor when he was a child, when he was a baby, in fact, and in the 15th century. And again, the whole book is the translation of this chart. It has, again, dozens of pages. It's very interesting. You can compare it to how the chart of the Roman emperor was delineated, and how the chart of the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 10th century, and how in the chart of the Roman Emperor Hadrian of the 2nd century, and you can see which delineation is more complete and more detailed. I mean, so again, European astrology also added. European astrology added. It focused rather much more on the topical approach as opposed to the universal approach that was used by the Hellenistic and the perso-arabic authors. So again, both approaches need to be used. Again, this is in ancient astrology, whereas again the other astrologers, Perso-Arabic, Hellenistic, European, they are incomplete because they're focusing on one at the exception of the other almost. Also, what can we say? Other famous European astrologers worth knowing about are Guido Bonatti. 13th century, he wrote the longest book of the Middle Ages, book of astronomy, Liber Astronomia, that Benjamin Dykes translated, over 1,000 pages. Also, I mentioned Luca Gorico. You should also know Girolamo Cardano, very famous Italian astrologer, 16th century. He was a incredible doctor. He saved dozens of people that were written off by physicians. He was also a very prominent mathematician. Some of his works have survived. He was also an avid gambler. It's interesting to know. Yeah, and who else? Well, there are many, but I'm just the most famous French astrologer, Jean-Baptiste Morin. He lived in the 17th century. He was the latest, along with William Lilly, the English astrologer. He wrote a book called Astrologia Gallica, French astrology. Morin, I like Morin a lot, because even though he was a reformer like Ptolemy, I disagree with many things with him. Having said that, Morin is perhaps the astrologer that was most detailed in his analysis and his explanations of the rules of the art of delineation. You will not find such detailed methodology perhaps in any other author. So Morin, especially book 21, is the natal branch. 22 and 23 are the predictive. Tremendous, priceless information, really. Any astrologers that are serious about learning this craft should have these books. And what else? Morin was also, of course, professor of mathematics. He taught mathematics at university. He was also a royal physician. He was present at the birth of Louis XIV, the Sun King, and etc. These were great men. These were remarkable people that contributed to the science and art of astrology, that lived and breathed astrology every day. So what can we summarize? Well, first of all, astrology. Remember that ancient astrology, natal astrology, did not exist prior to the 2nd century BCE at best. But actually, the earliest surviving charts are from the 1st century BCE, and most of them from the 1st century of the Common Era and onwards. So any other claims and theories, etc., can be easily proven wrong, because these are the charts, again, the facts, the surviving horoscopes, not someone's agendas. I don't care about agendas. I'm an astrologer, as I said. I'm not a historian. I'm not a scientist. I practice on a daily basis. I use what works. I test everything. And also to remember that when organized religion or some other schools of thought, or when they grow strong, they start to attack astrology. Astrology suffers, and as a result, astrology's role diminishes and people suffer, not just people, rulers, etc. What else? Whenever there is great exchange of information, of again of goods and services, of interaction between peoples, this is where progress and prosperity happens. Again, this is where astrology flourishes, and this is why we have the Renaissance in Italy later on, 15th, 16th, 17th century, when astrology reached its second peak after the Perso-Arabic period, whereby astrology became so famous that at one time Benson Bobrick, again the author of this book, wrote that astrology became as everyday as cards and dice, etc. Popes were using astrology, etc. He explains which popes use astrology and were astrologers themselves. What else can we say? Yes, so overall this is what I wanted to share. So please use an open mind. Don't be attached to any theories or any assumptions or claims. Check and read for yourself. See the veracity of my words and the facts that I have quoted, and also don't take astrologers at their own word, because some astrologers, for example, I will not even bother to give their names because they are a disgrace to astrology, but some astrologers of modern times, they claim that Hellenistic astrology or ancient astrology is not Western astrology because it's not Christian. Oh, this is such short-sightedness that it beggars belief, And so again, test everything, see where doctrine comes from, and you will see that regardless where it comes from, what matters is whether it works and whether you can rely on it in your actual practice. Again, I'm sharing this information for people to advance in their understanding and to make the necessary connections, to open their minds and to test things, not to accept blindly and be dependent on some authors or some claims. So I hope that this was instructional. If I missed something, I apologize. I can talk for much more, but if you have some genuine questions or some comments, I'll be happy to answer them. And thanks for watching. Thank you.